The G7 summit in Biarritz has ended, and there were some surprises there, including US President Donald Trump sharing a fun press conference with German Chancellor Angela Merkel and talks of a possible US-UK trade deal. Now, one that could help offset the economic damage of a no-deal Brexit. At least that is what British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been touting lately. But not so fast. The US Congress has a say on every trade deal, and many Congress members fear that a no-deal Brexit would return new controls to the Irish border, undermining the 1998 Good Friday peace agreement, which ended 30 years of violence between the two sides. Now, top Democrat Nancy Pelosi says that a trade deal has, quote, no chance whatsoever with a border. Congressman Richard Neal is co-chair of the Friends of Ireland caucus, which counts 54 Congress members, and he's no fan either. And there is also top Republican Peter King, an ally of President Donald Trump, and he called talks of a deal a needless provocation. So there is strong bipartisan support in Congress for the Good Friday Agreement. And to learn a little bit more about this possible dilemma, I'm joined by Arthur Sullivan from DW Business. Good to have you here with us, Arthur. I know that you've really looked into this entire story. Do you think that the Good Friday Agreement could really stand in the way of a US-UK trade deal?
Yeah, well, yes, Monica, I certainly think it could stand in the way. I suppose a little bit of history as a starting point. So there's a very strong history of strong relations between Ireland and America, and particularly in the political dimension, there's a very strong Irish-American lobby group, political caucus. That dates back more than a century, and at various stages of Irish history, it's been very influential. But for the purposes of our discussion, where it's really important is in the crafting of what you mentioned just now, the Good Friday Agreement. So the Clinton administration were absolutely critical in that very important peace deal being struck. And as a result of that, there is a deep understanding within large sections of the US Congress of how important the Good Friday Agreement is in Ireland, and also how important the Irish border and keeping that border open is to maintaining that peace agreement. So the reason why it could, as you say, stand in the way of a possible UK-US free trade deal is simply because they've said it. Several US politicians have said it. The third most senior US politician, Nancy Pelosi, has said it several times this year. Back in April, she visited the Irish border. She went to the city of Derry, and she spoke in absolutely unambiguous terms and said that if there is any disruption whatsoever to the current border situation in Ireland as a result of a chaotic no-deal Brexit or any form of Brexit which would change those arrangements, she said there's no chance whatsoever. And then on top of that, you have to look at other areas of US political life. So what you mentioned, the Friends of Ireland caucus, that's led by some very influential US politicians, Richard Neal, whom you mentioned, and a very important point on Richard Neal. Richard Neal is the head of the US House Ways and Means Committee. Now, the House Ways and Means Committee has a direct say in trade deals. They can block trade deals, and before it even gets to the Senate, they have to look at it and scrutinise it. They have the first port of call on that, so to speak.
OK, so there could be an awful lot of hurdles coming the way of a US-UK trade deal. But there is a possible solution, and that is called the backstop, which is part of the withdrawal agreement that Boris Johnson and the government in London is turning down. Why?
Well, I suppose it's first of all important to say that it's not everyone in Britain who's against the backstop. But, I mean, Boris Johnson himself voted for the most recent version of the withdrawal agreement, which included the backstop. But there is consistent opposition within Britain to the backstop. And to put it simply, the reason they oppose it is some of the more ardent Brexiteers believe that the backstop could keep Britain indefinitely in legal limbo with the EU. So as the backstop is currently phrased, it would keep the whole of the UK in a customs union with the rest of the EU until a solution has been agreed which would change the arrangements, would maintain the arrangements in the Irish border.
And London isn't so keen on that. So right now the UK there sits between a rock and a hard chair. Talking about Boris Johnson, because he also said that his government might not pay the so-called divorce bill, at least not in full, if Britain was to leave the EU without a deal. The European Commission, however, points out that a failure to pay could hamper future trade negotiations. Let's listen in.
All commitments that were taken by the 28 member states should be honoured, and this is also and especially true in a no-deal scenario where the United Kingdom would be expected to continue to honour all commitments made during EU membership. Rather than going now into a judicial action threat, I think that it is important to make clear that settling accounts is essential to starting off a new relationship on the right foot based on mutual trust. I would also say that, as far as I understand, this issue has not been raised with the EU side for the time being officially.
All right, the EU Commission there on the possibility that the UK does not pay the divorce bill. Let's bring in our financial market correspondent Ashutosh Pandey on this one. Not paying your bills doesn't go down well with anyone. How much money are we talking about and what would it mean for the EU?
Well, Monica, it's 39 billion pounds that both sides have agreed to, or 43 billion euros. This is largely the money that UK owes to the EU, the financial commitments that it has made as far as the budget is concerned, future projects are concerned, even pension for staff pensions are concerned. So that's a payment that both sides have actually agreed upon. Now, as far as the EU's ability to compensate for this loss is concerned, it certainly can. I mean, at the end of the day, 39 billion pounds is a huge amount of money, but not enough to cripple the EU's economy. It will have to cut some funding for long-term projects or call on richer members to actually bridge the gap. But the bigger loss would be actually the loss of trust with a key trading partner.
All right, Ashutosh, thank you so much. Last question to Arthur there. So the UK runs the risk of losing a friend. What other implications could there be for the United Kingdom?
Well, the really big implication is the one that Ashutosh just touched on. So in the event of them not paying that bill, which the EU says their existing commitments, it would jeopardise the prospects of a future trade deal with the EU, because the EU have said if they don't pay that bill, we're not talking about trade. Now, the UK can talk all it wants about doing a trade deal with the US, but the fact remains its biggest trading partner is the rest of the EU. So if there's no trade deal with the rest of the EU, then that will seriously hamper the UK's economy. And then the other point is, what would this do to the UK's goodwill on the international stage? If they don't pay existing bills, why should other countries get involved with them in trade deals or other negotiations? Because it would damage their standing, which at the moment is still quite high, despite everything that's happened with Brexit.
All right. Arthur Sullivan there from DW Business. Thank you so much for your insights there. And also a big thank you to Ashutosh Pandey in Frankfurt.